Hello everyone, I'm back and our text block has been resting under some weight overnight, and now I'm ready to begin working on my cover. So like I mentioned, your book can be any size, and mine is actually 9 inches in height here, from here to here, and then 10 1/4 length. So what we're going to do is to start to prepare some decorative paper to cover the book board with. As you can see with this one I had done before. Like I mentioned in the past, is that the book board is a little bit hard to cut through. So if you haven't trimmed your book board yet, you can also do that. Be patient with yourself. Take your X-Acto knife, lay your ruler down, and set it there and score it repeatedly until you very carefully get through the book board. So since I've got these already pre-cut, this is my book, I'm going to start working on the decorative paper. I have kind of these purple textured papers that I'm going to work with, and what I'm going to do is cover the book board basically like this, make it long enough so that it'll wrap around the edges. I'm leaving this one edge free because what I'm going to be doing later is adding a book cloth onto that edge in order to pull the whole case together, which you'll see later on. So essentially I'm just going to glue this up, attach it, and then let it rest under some weight, which is important because it does take a bit of time for that glue to dry. So my sheets of paper are just a little bit too big, so I'm going to trim them down so that I have a 3/4 edge on each side there that I can then fold over the top of that book. So if my height of my book is 9 inches and I want to add another 1.5 inches basically to it in order to allow for that fold over. So that would make my paper sizes 10.5 inches. So I'm just going to measure like I have done before with my little marks, and then trim it with my X-Acto blade. So there you are. You have one sheet that will go on one side, and then I'll do the other. Here's a little bit of a close-in view, measuring like I did with the other piece, 10.5 inches, and trimming it down. Then once I have my decorative cover paper ready to go, like I do here, and as I mentioned before, they'll be like this when I glue them down. And then the inside of this book will be covered with book cloth. So what I want to do now is put my cutting mat aside and get out some wax paper so that I'm able to do some gluing. So this is really helpful so that you don't end up with a mess on your table or elsewhere. So get some sheets cut and ready to go. Gather your glue. So this is a PVA that's been watered down a little bit. I have a couple different sizes of brushes, whichever works best for you. This size works pretty well, and then a little bit of a smaller one for doing the edges and the sides when we do the fold-ins. This I've decided is going to be my front cover. So the cover piece you want to have towards the right side of your book, you know, and this is my spine and my height. The back piece you want to have towards the left side. So what I'm going to do first on my decorative paper is to flip it over and just measure and either make little tick marks or make a line at that 3/4 inch measurement that I made. You know, a few tick marks helps fine, because I want to make sure that I place the book board down on the decorative paper so that I have it centered and that it will look nice when I do the turn-ins. So that's what I've got there. I just need one sheet of wax paper to start. And the first thing I'm going to do is grab my brush, open up my glue, and then give this a good coat of glue here on my paper. If it doesn't flow as easily as you'd like, you know, that means you might need just a little bit more water to help you brush it across the paper. But obviously you don't want to have too much water because you do want it to stick well and you don't want it to soak through the paper. So when you choose a cover paper to use, it is pretty important to choose something that isn't like too thin, not rice paper for certain. Or if you do choose something thin, then you'll have to back it with another kind of paper before you do this. Okay, so I have that pretty well adhered. I'm going to pick that up and get a fresh sheet of wax paper so that I don't get glue on my book. Place that down. I have to remember that it's upside down, so that means I'll have to put the edge of my book towards the opposite side that I might think. Press it down nicely with your hand. And then you want to flip it over and you have your bone folder. The bone folder is handy for a lot of things, not just for folding paper. You want to make sure that you smooth out any air bubbles that you see before you get too far in the process. So that's what I have here. And then I want to flip it back over again. So I'm going to grab a little bit of a smaller brush and do those edges. So you also want to make sure that you hit that foredge there so that it sticks well to the book board and you cover it properly. And then go all the way out to the edge of the paper. So I've got that pretty well covered. Then what I can do is lift this up. So I press on that upper edge to get it nice, pull that glued sheet of paper away, and then just flip it over slowly and press some more. And then I can also take my bone folder, again, rub on those edges to make sure that they're gonna adhere really nicely. And as you can see, this isn't absolutely perfect. It's just, you know, pretty good, as well as I could get. And then when I come back, you know, the pages of the book are going to stick to this, and so you won't see that slight bit of unevenness in that page. So now I'll do the other side. And then just repeat the process. And it will go the same way with the other side of the book. Lift up, press nicely, and then flip it over slowly again, and press. And then use the bone folder to rub it down. As you can see, some of the glue is coming from underneath because I got a little bit excess, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do after this is put it under some weight so that it can dry. But first I'm going to do the other side of my cover. So now I have my two sides of my book board covered. I'm carrying some fresh sheets of wax paper and I'm going to put them one on top of the other. And then I'm going to grab my lovely art history books again and let them sit and dry. The other thing to keep in mind that's important, make sure you put your lid on your glue, put your brushes in water so that they don't dry and get hard. Put them on a good amount of weight. If you don't weigh these down and you let them dry, you'll find that they end up kind of getting a curved arc in them. So the whole goal is that they dry good and flat. So now what we'll do is just leave these to dry for a few hours. And then while this is drying, we can prepare our text block. I've placed the text block at the edge of my table, just a tiny bit out from the edge with a lot of weight on top of it. Again, good use of your really heavy books that you might have around the house. I love books personally, so I have plenty. What I have now is my glue. And what you're going to do is to take and glue up the spine of your book from end to end, from head to tail. Also, the reason that I have this weighted down is so that my glue doesn't like seep into the pages of the book. I want to make sure it's going to be a nice tight spine that will hold together well for me. And you can see there I've got these tails that are sticking out a little bit, and I want to try to get those to go into the crease and become, you know, part of that book spine. So there you can see very distinctly my 5 sections of pages. I'm going to be, you know, fairly liberal with my glue and go across the thread as well, and that will help keep it in place very nicely. So you can see what's happening with that. Go all the way down to the other end of the book. And then after that, you're going to just let it sit and dry for a while. And then we'll work on creating our end bands. You'll let that sit and dry for a bit. And then we're gonna go on to working on adhering our, what's called super. It's just a loose weave fabric. And as well, bringing on our end bands of our book to finish out the text block. Getting that end tail there. The next thing I'm going to do is to measure out and attach my loose weave fabric. So in order to know what size that's going to be, I need to measure my spine. So what I want is to put the loose weave fabric in between this first line of stitching and the last line of stitching. So I'm going to measure that length. So it'll be just inside that. So for me, it's 6 3/4. I'm going to take a notepad and just write it down so I don't forget. 6 3/4 inch. For you, it might be different depending on the size of your book. And then I also want to know what the width of my spine is going to be. So here it's a 1/2 inch, which is a really great size. I'll write that down as well. 1/2 inch width. Then I'm ready to start to cut my loose weave fabric so I can adhere it to that spine. Now I'm cutting my loose weave fabric, and what I need to do is to make it that 6 3/4 inch length this way, the height of the spine from the first line of stitching to the last. So I'll measure that here on my fabric. It might be hard to see. You could potentially use a pen or something a little bit easier to see. My pencil is working pretty all right. I've got it in mind there. Just gonna slice that with my X-Acto blade. And then what you want to do is to create flaps on each side of the spine. So this is a little bit big, so I need to trim it down. It's about 1.5 inch flap on each side. And then I know that my spine itself is a 1/2 inch. So I want to make marks to measure, you know, where my spine is going to be, so I make sure that I center it there properly. So I'm going to, again, make several marks so that I can see them, but also make my lines straight. So I'm going to trim it down first. I don't know if you can see those, but there's some marks I made on there. So I trimmed the one edge, and then I'm just gonna fill out those lines that I made so I can see them when I get to gluing. Okay. With the pen I can see it a little bit better. And now I'm ready to attach this to my spine. I'm back to my spine and I need to grab some glue and glue up that area that I was talking to you about. That is between the two sets of stitching. So the first set of stitch to the last set, you just glue it up a second time. Even though I know there's already glue from that first glue up that I did. This just helps to solidify the book further. Okay, then I'm going to take my loose weave fabric, the super. I'm going to attach it there with two flaps sticking out on either end. Kind of rub it a little bit with my finger, and then I will grab the bone folder as well to make sure that it's going to be very well adhered and well attached. It's a little bit tough with that loose weave of the fabric, but you can get it to stick down. And we're going to be adding some more glue either way, so just do your best. If it's easier with your fingers, then use your fingers like I'm doing here. All right, so we'll let that sit for a little while, and then we're going to create our end bands. To create our end bands, what we need is one small piece of book cloth. We do need one larger sheet as well for our book later, our book cover. So I have book cloth, I have a little bit of twine or string that is a decent thickness, my bone folder, scissors, pencil, ruler, glue. So to know what size the end band should be, I know that's going to be the width of the book, which for me is 1/2 inch. And then it'll go from that last line of stitching out to the end of the book. So for me, again, it looks like 1 inch, as you can see on that ruler there. The width of my spine is 1/2 inch. I've got 2 end bands that I'm going to make. I'm going to go to the opposite side of my book cloth, and I'm going to draw out that 1 inch length out to the end of the book. I'm not going to worry about the width of the spine just yet because I'm going to make both end bands at one time. Actually, I think I'm going to do it this way. I don't need a huge amount of book cloth for the book end. So I've got 1 inch that will go out to the edge of the book, and then I need some space to do a little bit of a turnover. So I'm just going to add like 5/8 of an inch as well. So I'll do that measurement a couple of times so I can draw a line here on the back side of my book cloth. And, you know, I know that my spine is only 1/2 inch, so I really don't need any more than, you know, 2 inches of book cloth here. So I'm just gonna cut that out. You can use an X-Acto blade or you can use scissors, whichever is easier for you. And then I'll put that smaller sheet of book cloth aside. And this is the one I'm going to be working with. So I might get a little bit of wax paper out, put that underneath, and then I need to cut a small length of this twine that I have here. So just so you have an idea, you can take a look at this book here. And that is the end band that I'm creating. So it creates a little roll that goes over the edges of the book pages so that you don't see any kind of unevenness in the different sections and the sewing process. So it just kind of makes it nice and clean and neat looking. And then what you want to do is grab your glue, your brushes here. I don't want your brush to be too wet. And then I'm going to glue up, you know, this area from that line outward. The line is where, like I mentioned, the book ends. So I'm going to put that piece of twine down on that line and very carefully fold the book cloth over it to glue it down. So I'll try to hold that in place with my one hand, fold it over as well as I can with the other there, and try not to get glue onto the book cloth. Use my bone folder to create a nice ridge there, if you can see that. I'll rub it a good bit so that it gets really nicely defined. And there you can see it. So what I want to do is create 2 end bands out of this one larger end band that I produced. So the width of my book, the width of the spine of my book is 1/2 inch. This is 2 inches long, so I don't need it to be that long. So I'll measure 1/2 inch in the center area there. And then, oops, just use my scissors and trim off 2 end bands. Use some sharp scissors so I get a nice clean cut. And then these will go on either end of my book. So you see there. We will then go to the text block and attach these. Now I'm back to my text block glue. I'm going to glue up the end from the stitching out to the end of the book. This is my end band that I produced with my little ridge out there, if you can see it. I'm going to put it face inward towards the book, and then you see that little roll of the twine goes over the edges of the top of the book, and we'll make it look really nice when we set it into the case. So you can use the bone folder, rub it down a little bit to make sure it adheres well, and then do that also on the other end of the book. So we're getting close to getting our text block fully ready to be cased in. And it's just one more step in the process. We're going to rub this down, let it sit for a bit, But one last thing we're gonna do is to take some rice paper and kind of just pull all this together by attaching the rice paper over the top of the entire length of the book. So now this time I'm going to measure from end to end of the book. So here we have my 8 3/4 inch length there, and then the width of my spine is the 1/2 inch. So what I have here is a piece of rice paper. You don't necessarily have to use a piece of rice paper for this if you don't have one. I mean, regular sheet of paper will be fine, but the rice paper is nice because there is a little bit of, you know, some texture that will adhere well to the spine of the book. But, you know, I've used other kinds of just regular paper before to do this. So I'm measuring the 1/2 inch width of my spine, like I mentioned before, and then the length, the entire length of the text block, which is 8 3/4. So it's not really worth, you know, buying a whole sheet of rice paper if you don't happen to have it on hand just for producing one book. But it's also nice to, you know, buy the materials and then you have, you know, a bunch of them and you can make many books, you know, whenever you like. I love making my own handmade books because they're so much better quality, and over time the price is quite inexpensive and you get to choose high quality paper that you like versus like some of those, like the Moleskine, those are like so expensive, when I could just produce my own really high quality handmade book on my own, and then I, you know, have a certain amount of pride in it, I suppose, that, you know, I produced this book and it has a unique look and feel to it that is very distinctly, you know, and uniquely me, I would say. So here is my bit of rice paper that I'm gonna adhere to the spine to sort of pull the whole thing together. So my last bit of gluing on this spine, the 3rd time, which is funny, but it's gonna hold it together really nicely. I'm going to glue this up from head to tail so that I can then put that piece of rice paper that I just cut onto it. And once I finish that, then my text block is ready to be cased in. I can just let it sit and dry for a while, and then I'll prepare my case and finish off my book, which is really exciting. I usually do this in a kind of a 2-day time period, because as you know, you have to let something sit and dry overnight or sit underneath a bit of weight to make sure that your book is going to be really nicely made, well made, and hold together very well for you. Because like I said before, you know, I travel and I carry these things with me, and they do get beaten up a bit as I take them from place to place. So it's nice to know that I've done the best job that I can to put it together. So that's glued up. Here's my rice paper. Attach it from end to end. I mean, you'll have a little bit visible at the top and the bottom because of that, you know, that curl of the end band that goes over the top of your book. So I kind of press it lightly with my fingers first, and then I'll go back over like with my bone folder and press it down more securely. All right, I'm getting it pressed down nicely, and that really finishes off my text book. I'm going to let it sit and dry, and then on to the case. Hello everybody. What I have now is I'm working with my book cloth. I've got my text block ready to go. It's under some weight, and I'm going to start with creating a little bit of an end turn here to protect my corners, because like I mentioned before, I tend to carry my sketchbook all over the place, put it in backpacks and all of that. So what I have here is a piece of book cloth that's gonna go for my spine. My cover is ready. So this is one side, and then this will pull the whole book together to attach to the other side. And then that kind of foredge I'm going to create with a little bit of different color book cloth just for some fun, and this will be in gray. So I'm measuring that out right now. I've got the height of my book cover here, which is 9 inches, and then I added on some so I can have a turnover there, just like I did before, about 3/4 of an inch. So my height of my book cloth that I'm cutting for this foredge is 10.5 inches tall, and then I'm gonna make it about 1 inch to 1.5 inches wide so I can wrap it around that edge there. I think I'll go for 1.5 inches, and I'm gonna measure that right now and cut those 2 foredge pieces. You'll also need to cut a piece for that spine like I did previously. So you'll have to measure the height of your book, height of your bookboard, and then also give it enough width so that you can create a spine, which is the width of your book, a little bit of buffer space here, and then wrap around the book. So my book cloth is about 6¼ inch wide to go around the book here, and then it's as high as my book cover is, plus 3/4 inch on either end. So I'm adding 1.5 inches to the top so I have space for turn-ins to make the book look nice. And then when I put it all together, I'm going to put that text block inside my case that I'm producing, and then glue that down, and then all those edges will be covered and look really nice for me. So I have this cut and ready to go. So one of these pieces will go on this foredge and one on the other side. So what I need to do is decide, how far in I want that foredge piece to go. It doesn't need to go in too far, maybe 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch. So I'm gonna measure that so that I make sure I get it straight. I think I'll measure 1/2 inch there. And then I can glue it on. I'm gonna create a line there so I know where to place my book cover when I'm ready. I'm just gonna work with one side of my book cover to begin with so you can see what I'm doing. So I measured in 1/2 inch. I'm just gonna draw a line so that when I start gluing, I know where to place my bookboard and I get it centered. I also know that I have these turn-ins that will be 3/4 of an inch, so I'm just gonna make a mark for those two to make sure I get those even. And that's ready to go. Next, put some wax paper down. I've got my book cloth here. Grab my brushes and my glue again. I got my bone folder ready to go. Open up the glue. Just get the excess water off my brush. And I'm going to glue up that little area that I'm going to attach my bookboard to. So if you get a bunch of glue on that wax paper, you want to move it down, and then you can see here I'm placing my book cover on that foredge. I'm going to press it down, and what I could also do is perhaps flip it over and just check with make sure it's rubbed down well with the bone folder there. Looks nice. The next thing is to trim off the corners a little. So really you want to create an angle at that corner there, but you also have to make sure that you go out just a tiny bit to accommodate this thickness of the book board itself. So that gives you an idea of like how your angle should look. And then I'm just going to use my X-Acto blade and trim it. And so there you see that. I'm going to do that on the other end as well. I mean, you can either draw a line if that makes you more comfortable. You don't necessarily have to if you're used to this process. Again, see, I'm going out just a little bit because I know the thickness of my book is a certain thickness, and I don't want to have book board showing when you have my finished book. So next thing you want to do is just glue up these little bits. Go back to the wax paper and just glue that tiny bit, and you also want to maybe glue in a little bit on that foredge. This part is somewhat important, so you glue this across here, you press it down nicely, and then the important thing is that you kind of pinch that edge a little bit because you want that to also glue in. And then you do also the other end. So that's what I'll proceed with here. Just gonna fold that over, press it down, pinch the end so that I don't get a weird edge on that corner. Going to make sure that those stay down nicely for me. And then the next thing I'll do is glue up this other area. Get a fresh sheet of wax paper if you need, or you know, if you have your other sheets of wax paper from before that maybe the glue has dried, you can just use them again, which is helpful. So now I'm going to glue up this outer edge area. I'm going to make sure that I get that thickness of the book as well. Glue all the way out. And then I'll do a similar thing that I did with my paper, my decorative paper, when I covered the book. Lift it up, press it, and then flip it over. So I might switch out my wax paper again because I don't want glue getting on my book in places I don't want. Flip it over, press down with my hands a good bit. As you can see, that looks quite nice. I can flip it back over again and just rub a little bit more with my bone folder. Make sure I get excess glue out of the way. And make sure the edges are pressed down very nicely. So you can see there's the inside part, there's the outside part. I'll then repeat this process for the other side of my book. Now I have my book board ready to go, and I want to start working on creating my spine. So my spine piece is going to be, you know, the width of my text block, which was a 1/2 inch. You know, for you it is however thick your book is. And then you want the height to be the height of your book board. So I'm just going to use a mat board. You could use a real basic, you know, just hard weight cardstock paper as well, to make it a little bit more flexible. This I think will work for me for today. So the height of my book is the 9 inches, maybe slightly over 9 inches, and then the width would be the 1/2 inch. So I'm gonna measure that out now and cut it with my X-Acto knife. And here is my spine piece. The other thing that you see here on my table is just a basic sketchbook. I'm gonna open it up and just tear out a sheet. Put that aside. And the first thing that I will do is just glue down my spine piece to that piece of sketchbook paper. I don't have to make it perfect, just set it on there. So put my spine piece on a piece of wax paper, open up my glue, glue it up and set it down onto that sheet of paper. And it doesn't matter like where, we'll do the measuring later. So just throw it in there in the middle if that's where you want it to be. Now what you want to do is close up your glue and then place a ruler along the top of your spine piece and just draw a line. And you'll get it good and straight. Do the same on the bottom. So even though my spine is crooked on my piece of paper, as you see, in the end, it'll end up being straight. Then what you want to do is to measure out 2 inches from each side of the spine. And then you can take your X-Acto blade and trim it. Also trim, the top and the bottom as well. And then you'll want to measure the 2 inches from the other side of the spine too. And this really just, creates a template so that you can attach your sides to the spine, your covers to the spine, and get it correct before you start applying your book cloth across there. It's just a little bit easier to handle because sometimes it's difficult to deal with the glued up book cloth to make sure your measurements are correct. Now you want to measure 3/8 from the spine piece, 3/8 inch on each side. Because that's going to be where your book cover will begin. And that will give you enough space to nicely set your text block into the case and have it sit really well for your book. There we have it. I'm going to draw a line on each side here because this will be helpful when I lay down my book cover and get it lined up correctly. And this will allow you to make sure that you get, the front cover that you want and the back cover that you want, if they're different or if they vary in any way, like mine do. So the next thing is that you'll need a little bit more of your wax paper, which I've got a piece here. This is the front of my book, and I'm going to glue up this piece of paper and lay down my book. I can probably use a little bit larger brush this time, easier. So make sure that you're applying glue only from that pencil line outwards. Don't put glue elsewhere, otherwise it'll turn into a little bit of a mess for you. I'm gonna get a fresh sheet of wax paper, set it down, and then I'm just going to set my book cover on top. So I'm putting it, face outward, this so I see the cover. And it just makes it a lot easier than if it were face downward. I wouldn't be absolutely sure that I got the right edge, because sometimes when you're working really hard on a long project, this, like I said, takes me about 2 days to complete that. You might get a little bit tired, or you might forget something a little bit more easily if you've been working on it for a long time. So I'm just gonna press that down so it's nice and solid. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side so I can attach the, the back side of my book. So I've got my scrap piece of wax paper. I'm gluing up that other side. And then I'll place the back side, the back cover of my book down onto that paper. So we're getting close to almost being finished. Very exciting. Put that aside, grab my other cover. It's also a good idea to just maybe put a ruler down and line them up just to make sure everything's, good and straight. The paper helps with that as well. But I just want to make sure that my text block is gonna sit into my book really nicely. So I've got this one ready. Press it down. It's starting to, become a book cover. There's a lot of embellishments and a lot of other fun things you can do with your books. This is gonna just help you understand how to make a basic structure for a sketchbook, and then from there maybe you want to research further on your own how you can do things like add a little window and maybe put a little printed image in there, or other things that you might want to add into the book that could be embellishments. So when I do this, I always flip it over as well, just to make sure there's no air bubbles on the other side. Rub it a bit with my bone folder, and then I'm pretty good to go. In order to finish up the case, you want to then cut a piece of book cloth that will go across the spine, across that paper that we just attached the two sides to. What you want it to be is, obviously the size of your spine, plus you've got that buffer area, and then 2 or 3 inches in on the book. So what we want to do is, to make sure that we're gluing things properly, is do some measurements on the back side so that both sides of the book cloth look even with the book. So my spine area there is about 1.5 inches or so. So what I'm going to do is measure the center here. This is basically 6 and 3/16, I would say. About 3 1/8 is going to be my center line there. I'll do it in pen so you can see it a little bit more easily, since I've got this black cloth. Again, just these little tick marks, and then I can draw a line to signify the center point. And then from there, I'm gonna want to know where to set my spine down at. So like I said, I'll center that. It's about 1.5 inches width. So 3/4 on each side. I'll measure out from that. And then when I glue this up, I'll be able to see what I'm doing, set my book down in the proper spot. And then remember, you have space for your turn-ins on the top and the bottom as well. And so we'll measure those. And then when we do the gluing, we'll set it down very carefully and everything will look really nice. So it was 3/4 at the top, 3/4 at the bottom. So whatever size your book is, like I said, mine's 9 inches. If yours is 10, then just add that 3/4 on each end to your measurements, and you can make it the size that you want it to be. I usually try to do at least 3 tick marks just to make sure that I'm correct, because sometimes I'll make a little mistake. Happens to everyone. So my book cloth is ready. I can get some wax paper out and put that underneath my book cloth. The first thing that you want to do is to then glue up that spine area of your book. So just this interior white area, and then we'll begin to attach that to the book cloth that we've prepared here. So you might want to use both, maybe just the large one, but maybe want to use a little bit of the small brush too. Depends on how comfortable you are with making sure that you get to the edges. It is important that you get that interior width of the bookboard itself. See here? We want that to adhere to the book cloth really nicely. So just double check that that's got glue on it as well. And then you can lift up your book, and then you want to have it lifted up and then center it on your marks there, and then press down nicely. So this part is standing up. Just press for a moment, check the edges there, and then we're going to flip it over in a second here. Maybe just press the back of the spine. Don't worry about getting any creases just yet, because it's more important on the outer edge than on the inner. So now I'm going to carefully flip it over, let it fall as it is, and then I'm going to use my bone folder to press down the cover and start to define the spine and the edges of the bookboard there. So I have the spine here. I'm going to use my bone folder to lay that out so you can start to see it. So get those edges glued in there. Press it down. So there you can see my spine a little bit more easily. So that's what I've got defined here in this area. And then these edges, and then I'm getting the edges of the bookboard itself there. Now you can see what I've got going, and what I want to do next is to glue up this area and paste it down. So and glue up the board there. But certainly we don't want to have glue appearing on the outer edges. You don't want it to go into the cover or anything itself. So maybe you want to take a little pencil mark to give you an idea of how far out you should go with your gluing. And then get that glued out and then press down. Do it a bit carefully at first, and then you can press with your bone folder. And get it to adhere quite nicely. So do that with each side. There's one. It's looking good. And then work on the other. Next thing I want to do is then flip the entire book over, and we're going to work on the turn-ins here. Just take a little bit of glue with your small brush, glue up that turn-in area. Again, make sure you get kind of the edges there. And then you can start by the outer edges and just go and fold those in straight up, and then do the middle spine, and then just let that center area fold or crease a little bit as it needs, since that's the area where we're gonna have the book fold over and have the text block sit inside your book, your case. So there you go. Just press down a little bit more with your bone folder. Don't worry about uneven edges like that, because when we put our text block in, that will all get covered up. No one's absolutely perfect. We tried our best. If it lines up, then great. If not, it's okay. And then do the other side. And then the best thing to do after all of this is to, again, put your cover under some weight and let it sit and dry for a while before you fully case the entire book in, because you can see how the book board tends to want to curl a little bit since you apply glue and water to it. Helps to let it dry flat. Then your book will be nice and straight. All right. So what I can do now is flip it over, just check it out, make sure everything's looking good, and then I will grab my books again. It's best to put some wax paper down just to make sure nothing sticks to your books, and then put it under weight for a good amount of time. And then we'll come back in a little while and case it in. Hello everyone. Now we have our case ready to go, the cover, and it's ready to be cased in with the text block. So as you can see, here's my front and my back. Here is my text block that I've got prepared with the end bands and everything in place. So what I want to do first is take the text block place it inside the case and situate it so that it sits really nicely within the spine and everything. So when I placed my text block inside of my book, I found that it was a little bit uneven on the foredge, a little bit going out further than I wanted it to, because I want it to sit nicely inside the book. So what I'm doing is trimming down the foredge of my text block. So I put my ruler down, and then I take my X-Acto blade, and I very patiently work my way through all of the pages. So, like I said, patiently. Don't be too swift with it, otherwise you're gonna end up making a huge mess with the foredge there. So what happened is that I placed the text block inside the book, and it just was coming out over the edge a little bit too much, and so I decided to trim it down. So if that ever happens to you, it's not a tragedy. You know, you didn't make such a huge mistake. It's not a big deal to trim down the pages of your book after it's already been sewn together. And actually sometimes that's a really nice thing, because then you have your edges of your pages all even and together. So if there's any kind of unevenness too, what you can do is take a bit of sandpaper if you need to, and just sand it. I mean, paper is pretty much wood, so you can treat it the same way as you would a piece of wood, and to make it a nice even surface. So then you can compare that with your case again, and just make sure that it fits inside quite nicely. I'm pretty happy with that and how it looks. And then once I press it down again, it's gonna fit really nicely and become a good solid book. And just as an FYI, when I made this book, actually found that the text block was a little bit too small, and that's something obviously you can't change after the fact. But what you can do is add an embellishment, and what we ended up doing was to include a pencil holder there. It makes it, you know, easy enough to hold a pencil, and also makes it look like my mistake was quite purposeful. See how that happens? And so with this next one I've just produced, you know, I made it a little bit too long, and so all I had to do was to trim it down. So there are solutions to problems if they happen. So what I have now is my new book that I've just produced. I want to make sure that I've got it situated inside the book where I want it to be before I start doing any gluing, because this is somewhat, you know, the scary part, where once you glue it down, you know, there's just no going back. It's done. So I'm going to start by putting the text block nicely into the case, and then I'm going to very carefully open up the cover, flip it to the side, grab some wax paper. So for this process, you're going to need several sheets of wax paper, so it might be good to just tear some out and get it ready to go. I'm going to put one sheet of wax paper underneath the very first page of the text block. So do this carefully so that you make sure that you're not moving the text block. That's super important. Otherwise, it won't be in the right spot for your book. And so this is to help you glue up the first page here without getting glue underneath on the other pages of the book, because this is really just to glue that page over to the cover and get it to adhere well for you. So I'm gonna make sure I've got plenty of glue. Mix up some more if you need. And the first thing I want to do is just glue down this loose weave fabric. This is here to provide some texture so that that spine area is going to sit nicely and stay adhered to the cover, because when you're using the book, obviously you're opening and closing it quite a bit, and you want to make sure it's going to stay solidly together for the long haul. So now I'm going to glue up that entire page, the first page. I want to make sure I don't get any glue on the spine. Do not glue the spine, otherwise you won't be able to open the book properly, as a reminder. So there's a space that's meant to give it a little bit of breathing area so that your pages will open fully when you're drawing or when you're journaling. I kind of do a combination of both when I have a sketchbook, making impressions and writing impressions of the place that I'm going to, or making notes about an exhibition that I might be planning for, things like that. I'm most successful in filling out sketchbooks when I'm either traveling or when I'm planning for a big project or big exhibition. Other times I just feel like I need like some sort of sense of aim, I suppose. Another thing that might help you fill out a sketchbook is, you know, being in a class and having those deadlines where you need to fill out a certain number of pages for, you know, maybe for life drawing or other things like that. I mean, that's the hard part, is like, you know, life drawing, what are you going to do when you have a limited access? You know, draw the people around you, draw yourself, draw, you know, different parts of the body to practice and things like that. Okay, so I'm getting this glued up thoroughly. I'm going to carefully pull that sheet of wax paper out because it's got glue on it. I don't want it to get stuck inside my book. I'm going to put a fresh piece of wax paper that has no glue in it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the foredge of the text block as I very carefully close the book. So I'm going to go over the top of the end there and then carefully close down on the book, making sure first that it's perfectly situated where I want, and then once it's down, no going back. Press really hard. You just gotta trust that you did it right, and then we're gonna flip it over and do the other side. Same way. See, it's looking like a really nice book. Pretty happy with that. And then I'm gonna open up the book again on this side carefully. Flip it over. I'm not gonna use the same sheet of wax paper that I put glue on. See if one of these is dry that I'll use there. And I'm gonna do the same thing that I did on the other side. I'm gonna grab a little bit more glue. That one's about out. Again, first glue up this loose weave cloth and glue that down. And then you want to go ahead and glue up the entire page. Make sure you cover all the surfaces. If you end up with air bubbles, you know, it's not going to adhere well in your book. You know, you want to make sure that you've got this going and attached for the long term. Pull that sheet of wax paper out. Get a fresh sheet. put that in carefully so you're not moving the text block. And then again, hold the foredge of the text block and carefully close the book just like you did before. Set it down, press hard for a bit. And then the hard part is that you're not allowed to open this book again until tomorrow. So you can admire it for a moment here. Beautiful, I'm very excited, love it. But the important thing at this point is to put it under a lot of weight again, like we've done in the past. Pile your art history books on top. And then don't touch it overnight, and then come back to it tomorrow. And then you'll have an amazing brand new sketchbook that is all handmade and individual and no one else has but you. Exciting. All right, so now I'm back the next day. I've let my beautiful book sit under some weight and fought the urge to open it up, which is really important not to do, particularly when the glue is really wet like that. When I've covered the whole pages, it's really important to force yourself to let it sit overnight. Come back, and I'm removing my weight, my amazing art books, and I have my book underneath. Now I can lift it up. Looks beautiful. I can remove the wax paper from the pages. It looks really nice and smooth all the way out to the edge. And now I can start sketching. I'm really excited. Thank you all for joining me with this next workshop on making a book. Hopefully you can make your own book as well and use it, on your own, or as you're walking out, traveling, doing whatever it is that you do. Good luck!